The PlayStation 5 has once again claimed the top spot in the United States for February 2026, finishing as the best-selling console in both units sold and total dollar sales. On the surface, that might sound like business as usual. Sony wins another month. But when you really start to break down the numbers reported by Circana, this result becomes a lot more interesting, because this isn't just a story about who finished first, it's a story about momentum, shifting market dynamics, and a new competitor that is quietly reshaping the entire console landscape. Right behind the PS5 is the Nintendo Switch 2, which held firm in second place for the second consecutive month. That kind of consistency this early in a console's life cycle is extremely important, especially when you consider that we're now 9 months into the Switch 2's run. Most consoles start to cool off by this point, but instead the Switch 2 is doing the opposite. It's accelerating. Compared to the original Nintendo Switch during the same 9-month window back in 2017, the Switch 2 is tracking 45% ahead. That's not a small lead. That's a massive gap that signals Nintendo didn't just follow up their success, they amplified it. And that creates an interesting dynamic, because while the PS5 won the month, the Switch 2 might be winning the bigger war in terms of long-term growth. These are two very different kinds of victories. Sony is leveraging an established install base, a mature ecosystem, and a steady stream of content. Nintendo, on the other hand, is riding the wave of a new generation of hardware that is still building momentum, and doing so at a faster rate than its predecessor ever did. The difference in momentum becomes even clearer when you look at the hardware revenue numbers. Overall spending on gaming hardware jumped 22% year over year in February, rising from $267 million to $326 million. And that kind of growth doesn't just happen randomly. It's being driven almost entirely by new hardware adoption. In this case, the Switch 2 is doing the heavy lifting. Because here's where things take a turn. Despite finishing first, the PS5 actually saw a 10% decline in dollar sales compared to the same time last year. The Xbox Series X and Series S dropped even more significantly at 32%, and the original Switch saw a staggering 69% decline. That tells us something very important. The current generation of hardware, outside of new releases, is beginning to slow down. The industry isn't shrinking, but it is transitioning. For Xbox, finishing third isn't necessarily a surprise, but the scale of the decline is worth paying attention to. A 32% drop suggests that Microsoft is in a holding pattern right now, relying more on ecosystem and services rather than hardware growth. That strategy can work, but also means that in months like this, where hardware is driving the conversation, Xbox naturally falls behind. Now, if we zoom out beyond just hardware, the overall gaming industry is still growing, but just barely. Total spending in February reached $4.56 billion, which is only a 1% increase compared to last year. That might sound underwhelming, but in a market this large, even small increases represent stability, and stability is important, especially during a transitional phase like this. Breaking that total down gives us even more insight. Spending on video game content, which includes full game sales, downloadable content, and subscriptions, was essentially flat, dropping by less than 1%. That tells us that players are still spending, but not necessarily spending more. Hardware, as we've already discussed, is the standout category with significant growth. Accessories, meanwhile, dipped by about 3%, which suggests that players aren't upgrading peripherals at the same pace. Looking at the year-to-date numbers reinforces this trend. Total spending for 2026 so far has reached $9.26 billion, up 2% from last year. Hardware is again the star, growing 19%, while content has only increased by 1%. Accessories continue to decline slightly, so the takeaway here is clear. Growth in 2026 is being driven by hardware adoption, not software expansion. On the software side, however, February delivered one of the biggest launches we've seen in quite some time. Resident Evil Requiem debuted at number 1 and immediately became the best-selling game of the entire year so far. According to industry analyst Matt Piscatella, the game's launch performance was nothing short of a blockbuster. To put it into perspective, Requiem's launch week generated over 60% more revenue than Resident Evil Village did back in 2021, along with a more than 40% increase in units sold. Those are massive gains for a franchise that was already performing at a high level, and it shows that strong, recognizable IP still has the power to drive on the market in a major way. Beyond Resident Evil, February also brought a wave of new releases that made their mark on the charts. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined debuted at number 7, while Mario Tennis Fever landed at 11. God of War Sons of Sparta came in at 14, and My Hero Academia All's Justice secured the 17th spot. This kind of lineup shows a healthy mix of genres and audiences, from RPG fans to sports players to action-adventure enthusiasts. One of the most fascinating movements on the chart came from Diablo 2 Resurrected, which skyrocketed from 195th place all the way up to 13th. That kind of jump is extremely rare, and it was largely driven by the release of its Infernal Edition on Steam. It highlights how powerful PC launches and re-releases can be, especially when paired with the right timing and platform. Similarly, Doom: The Dark Ages climbed into the top 10 on PC thanks to aggressive promotional pricing during a major sale. It's a reminder that even older or previously released titles can re-enter the spotlight under the right conditions. Pricing strategy still matters. A lot. So when you step back and look at the full picture, February 2026 isn't just about the PS5 taking first place. It's about a market that's evolving. Sony is still leading in the present, leveraging its strong position and consistent performance. Nintendo is building momentum at an impressive pace with the Switch 2, potentially setting up for long-term dominance. Xbox is leaning into a different strategy, one that prioritizes ecosystem over hardware wins. And the software side of the industry continues to be driven by major releases and smart pricing strategies. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more deep dives like this, give me the thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you're not missing any future uploads. And if you want more content, consider supporting my Patreon. The most recent exclusive video goes even deeper into one of the biggest questions in gaming right now: whether or not console exclusives still matter in today's industry. It's a topic that ties directly into everything we talked about here, from hardware competition to long-term strategy. Thanks for watching, and as always, game on.